Well, everyone, the result for the Anime Awards are in, and as expected, ha! I really don't give a hoot about it. I made my commentary, and for the past month, I've had a frightful time trying to keep up with my own scheduling. Only 2 months into 2018, and I'm already behind on the monthly manga feature. Jeez. February was a mess. In spite of that, I think I know why you're here. Even though it's a bit late on getting this review out, I have managed to complete a long-running shonen manga as part of my new series. And now, because of the intensity, pain, laughter, tears, and unwarranted attachment to characters I probably shouldn't care about, I present to you Spamcracker's official review of Shinobu Otaka's Magi The Labyrinth of Magic. Now, before anybody asks, the word that is spelled M-A-G-I is supposed to be pronounced Magi, but this is a really weird case where, apparently Magi is the plural form of the word magus, which comes from the Latin meaning a magician. That's where we get the word magician from, and magic and such things. But in the series, they use Magi, or Magi as they say, in a singular form, so it might be an entirely different word with entirely different roots, and if somebody wants to correct me on that, saying that the author intended it to be pronounced this way because of something that has to do with Japanese translation of a different language, then that's fine. But until I am proven otherwise, I'm going to go with what I know and say Magi. And for the further purposes of this review, I'm going to be using all other names, words, and terms. I'm going to say them the way that they say them in the English dub of the anime, at least as I've heard them. Unless, of course, I don't, because I know they do pronounce some things wrong. Isn't that right, Titus? Magi is a series that ran for 8 years in the magazine Shonen Sunday from 2009 to 2017. It has a total of 369 chapters accumulated into 37 total volumes of manga. During its run, the manga managed to spawn 2 successful seasons of an anime that covered the content of the first 20 volumes pretty faithfully. Even from a distance, it's not the kind of show that's easy to forget about, and has a distinct enough look for the characters to be recognized even out of context. It was this recognition and genuine curiosity that brought about my own introduction to the series. When it became available to me, I watched the anime and made the decision to finish it off when it became a completed story. February of 2018 was the month I decided to do this, and let me tell you, it wasn't exactly easy. Overall, Magi is easy to recommend to people as an atypical shonen series. Everything from the first 3 quarters is pretty solid, from the settings to the magic and the characters. It takes a lot of inspiration from various ancient cultures, Arabia's 1001 Nights, China, and Rome to name a few of the more prominent ones, and the world is so expansive that we get to explore it ourselves along with the rest of the series cast. Otaka manages to successfully illustrate the various cultures and worldviews present in her story, and the general designs seen in this story are pretty fun to look at. I personally hold the designs for the Jin equips in high regard, that are very cool and elaborate to look at without being incredibly gaudy. On the note that the series is long-running, being relative to the average manga, the first few chapters may seem a bit slow, and whether it be through the anime or the manga, it might take some people more time than others to become fully invested in the series. Some may be captured by the unique setting and inspirations immediately, while others may take a bit of time to warm up to it. But later arcs in the ever-growing plot surrounding the world of Magi makes the small first steps to starting this journey so much more worth it. Moving forward, let's talk about the characters. The Labyrinth of Magic has a manifold of them, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Despite the large number of the cast, a good portion of them are given a surprising amount of time to grow and have proper development. The 3 main characters, of course, being among them: the mysterious young Aladdin, former Prince Alibaba, and the former slave girl Faunalise Morgiana. As the series progresses, we get to see how they grow together as a group and as individuals, as they frequently separate and reunite along their own journeys, following the strings of fate. Almost any other character who is given the slightest degree of importance is allowed to have some time devoted to tell their own story, as well as paint a better picture for the reasons behind their actions, whether they be righteous, vengeful, or some other ugly gray mess on the scales of right and wrong in between. As more and more are introduced, very few characters are an exception to this, but one I feel got the short end of the stick was actually Judar. A dark Magi, and not easy to forget, you'd think that the influence he is reported to have would make him an important character, but he is surprisingly irrelevant to about 3/4 of the series, and his motivations and past are touched on only in vague passing, letting the reader be filled in by what other characters have to say about him. Perhaps he has a bigger part in the Sinbad spin-off to fill in the gaps? Contrarily, the character of Hakuryuu turned out to be far more influential to the series than what I myself had predicted for him based off of the first 2 seasons of the anime. Arguably, he ended up with the best character arc over the course of most of the series, and is incredibly satisfying to watch his story unfold. It would seem that these 2 characters switch on the order of importance despite first impressions. Now, onto the subject of the plot itself. From a critical standpoint, the Labyrinth of Magic has a very strong setting and characters in that setting, so how about the plot and the story of the series? As was stated above, the story and themes themselves are also strong up until about the final arc, where it begins to suffer from some unfortunate tropes common to shonen manga, but we will discuss that more in depth soon enough. The majority of the plot delves into the main trio and their various allies looking to stop the villainous abnormalities that plague their world, causing its various peoples to suffer. It is a straightforward plot, and a majority of time Magi makes itself different from other shonen battle manga, where everything is solved with fists and explosions, even if that's where it ends up going, but I digress. The Labyrinth of Magic makes a clash of ideals and political stances the most prominent figure in its overall plot, and for the most part, the fact that these ideals and standards are constantly clashing because the characters are only human is the reason vicious wars are started and are the driving force for much of the cast. Things like slavery, cultural upheaval, and economic sabotage are not taken lightly, and calls human nature into question in some of the most natural and genuinely intriguing ways I think I've ever seen in a manga, without exclusively demonizing either side of any given argument. Naturally, despite the characters' best attempts to solve their problems diplomatically, battles tend to spring up many times. However, even in these events, none of them are unnecessarily drawn out, until the end, but don't worry, we're almost to that point. The anime stops at just over the halfway point in the manga, after which it goes into a short few chapters of a rest before jumping headlong into a lengthy flashback arc that literally explains everything about everything. The arc is too long for its own good, despite all the things it has to add to the story. It takes up several paperback volumes. A great deal of the series fans like this arc, and it's easy to see why, taking into consideration the sheer amount of explanation that goes into it. Almost all of the questions from the first half of the story are answered. However, the biggest problem there is with this arc is how well it foreshadows the escalation problem that these types of series are prone to, and unfortunately this is not an exception. Things start to get bigger and bigger and deeper and more confusing the longer this flashback goes on, and while thinking about it hard enough keeps everything in line, it's just out of the realm of what was standard for the series, and it might lose its readers here. Luckily, after the flashback is over, the readers jump right back into the current time and place, although ironically, in retrospect, we get a look at what was going on with other important members of the cast who weren't present for the magically projected literal flashback. An arc that was rather exciting. As the story draws closer to its final arc, we begin to wonder what will happen next. Now, as a side note, every once in a while I find myself reading the author's notes in the backs and front of these paperback volumes, and I find myself wondering how much of this was planned from the early stages. In the case of Magi, it seems that most of it was thought through very well with a certain end goal in mind. However, it's time to delve into the weaker points of this otherwise enthralling manga. Mostly as the series entered its final arc, we are privy to some unfortunate tropes that more or less plague the shonen manga demographic. The first and foremost is the series' increasing unwillingness to kill off its characters. Now, this almost makes it sound like this trope is a bad thing all the time. Quite the contrary, it's not as though death is a necessity for such a story to be good. However, it should be noted that in earlier parts of the series, people dying was a significant part of the story and was integrated into it effectively, impacting the characters and the world they lived in. As the story continues, obviously these characters would learn from the past and try to prevent more death from happening, but whether we're talking about a character the reader may know more or less well and have gotten a bit attached to, or an antagonist who has been around for most of the series and they've wanted to see dead since their introduction, there is just no more resolve in even acting like someone with a name might die or be dead. Aside from this, there is also the aforementioned escalation problem that, without going too into detail, mortals or former mortals are now battling for godhood in an attempt to earn the right to fight other gods in other dimensions. Things get big very fast and back to being a bit confusing and involving multiverses and all that fun stuff, and it can be hard to wrap your head around sometimes. In addition to that, the very final arc of Magi has an uncharacteristic inconsistency to it. While the rest of the story is remarkably consistent and appears well thought out, this last piece comes across as being a bit disorganized. It almost seemed like, even though there was a clear path the series was intended to take, something got in the way at the last minute, and it changed 3 or 4 times on its way to the finale within the last 13 chapters or so. Like it was a kind of trial and error ending. The Labyrinth of Magic had so much going for it up until the point where it eventually devolves into a shonen battle finale, dwarfing the existential crises that were present in the middle of it. So, now that all this has been said, how should one judge the series as a whole? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say Magi is a solid 7. It was a fun ride, and obviously, if it didn't have that kind of merit, I wouldn't have watched it twice and then read the whole manga in under a month. It really is a memorable and unique story that takes place in a world worth exploring and filled with dynamic and diverse characters with just as varying viewpoints. It has some comedy, action, politics, tragedy, and romance. The biggest fault with the series was the fact that it was so big and exciting that towards the end, it had a hard time following through with itself. The series was big and the finale had to be bigger. It escalated to the point where it hurt to think about what was going on towards the end, and then tapered off into something more standard than what it should have been. There are things that are easy to complain about regarding this manga, but I believe that most of them are in the eye of the beholder. In the end, I have to say that for a long-running series, Magi The Labyrinth of Magic by Shinobu Otaka is a good manga and is the kind of series that deserves the recognition it got. If another season of the anime is announced in the future, I'll surely be waiting to watch it myself. And there you have it, folks. Spamcracker's complete review of Magi The Labyrinth of Magic. It is up a week later than I wanted it to be, and not even at the end of the month I read it for, but I have to make exceptions to the schedule sometimes. Hopefully March will be better, as I will be reading a much, much shorter manga, but who knows what the future holds. Until then, thank you to everyone who managed to watch this video all the way through. Leave a like or comment if you enjoyed the video, or if you don't agree with this review, just tell me your thoughts anyway. Suggestions for future manga to read for the monthly feature are always appreciated, as are suggestions for future videos and artistic endeavors. And that's it for now, people of Earth and elsewhere. Once more, thanks for watching this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Ciao!